Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. The rain fell in thin blades on the slippery cobblestones of the alley, creating an eerie rhythm that mingled with the moans of the wind. Emily, a 9-year-old beggar, crouched under the awning of a closed shop, clutching a threadbare old coat that only partially protected her shivers. Her large, bright brown eyes scanned the passing figures, searching for a hostile gesture or a generous hand. At the end of the alley, a man walked confidently, wearing an impeccable gray suit that contrasted with the surrounding squalor. His shoes made a dull thud on the cobblestones, and his gold watch gleamed despite the rain. It was Thomas Walker, a wealthy heir to a New York real estate dynasty, a man with a stern face but a generous soul, a widower for several years and the father of a little girl, Lily. Emily felt her heart sink. She knew that this man, whom she affectionately called Uncle, had no idea of the imminent danger. In her trembling hand, she held a small, carefully wrapped package, a cream cake, courtesy of a luxury pastry shop she knew well, but whose generosity was only apparent. "Uncle, don't eat," she cried, her voice fragile but firm. The man stopped, surprised by the girl's tone. Emily took a step forward, her breath puffing in the humid air. "She put something in your cake," she added, clutching the package to her chest. Her eyes, filled with anguish, begged for caution. Thomas narrowed his eyes in disbelief. "Who?" he asked, his voice deep but slightly amused. I don't know her name, but I saw her," Emily stammered, her gaze shifting toward the shadow of a nearby building. "She wanted to hurt you. I heard her talking." A shiver ran through the man. For the first time in a long time, he felt real fear, icy and penetrating. The once unremarkable alley suddenly seemed foreign, dangerous. Who would want to attack him like this? And why choose a cake, a symbol of innocence and sweetness, to so evil? The wind picked up, rattling shutters and billboards. Emily took a step back, as if afraid the man would rush in without heeding her warning. "Please," she whispered, her voice almost muffled by the rain. "Don't eat it." Thomas reached for the cake, his fingers hovering over the package. His eyes met Emily's, and in those eyes, he saw sincerity, courage, and fear. A strange feeling passed through him. He had to listen to this child, because what she was saying came from something much deeper than simple fear. At that precise moment, footsteps echoed in the shadows. A shudder of alarm ran through Emily. Thomas felt his heart race. This wasn't just a warning anymore, this was the beginning of a dangerous chain of events, a plot woven in the shadows, ready to explode in his life. And in the silence that followed, the rain continued to fall, as if it itself wanted to wash the city clean of what was soon to come. Thomas Walker sat heavily in the leather chair in his office, still soaked from the rain. The cake lay before him on the desk, untouched, like an innocent dessert. But his heart was pounding, and his hands were trembling slightly. Emily, sitting on the corner of the desk, looked at him worriedly. "I told you not to eat it," she whispered, her little fingers clenching the hem of his jacket. Thomas looked at her for a long time. Despite his skepticism, he felt an irrational worry fill him. She wasn't the kind of child who made up stories to get attention. Emily had something in her eyes, something real, something deep. "All right," he said finally, taking the cake and placing it in a sealed box. "You were right, Emily. You never know." The room was silent, interrupted only by the ticking of an old clock and the murmur of rain on the windowpanes. Thomas thought of his daughter, Lily, sleeping in the manor's bedroom, unaware that an invisible danger loomed above their heads. He picked up his phone and immediately contacted John Harrison, a private investigator he had known for years. John had solved several sensitive cases for him, but this time the danger seemed closer, more personal. "John, I need you." "Immediately," Thomas said, his voice deep but tense. "Someone tried to poison me." "Calm down, Thomas," John replied. "Where's the threat?" "The cake?" "Yes. And it was Emily, she saved my life." "I can't explain it," but she's right. There's a plot against me. A few minutes later, John arrived at the manor, also soaked, but with determined eyes. He inspected the cake, his knowledge of toxicology and criminology allowing him to immediately detect the subtlety of the threat. Thomas, this cake isn't just any dessert. It contains a rare and extremely dangerous substance, he said seriously. If you had eaten it. I don't even want to imagine. Thomas felt a chill run down his neck. The danger was real, tangible. He looked at Emily and gave her a small smile. Thank you, Emily. You saved my life. The little girl nodded, but her gaze remained worried. We need to know who did this, and why, she whispered. Thomas stood up and walked to the large window of his office, looking down at the city below. His thoughts raced, his rivals, his unknown enemies, and most of all, Victoria Caldwell, his former associate who had never gotten over their separation. She had always had a cruel and calculating side. Could she be behind all this? One thing was clear, he could no longer afford to remain passive. His life, his daughter's, and now Emily's, depended on his vigilance and his ability to foil this plot before it was too late. The manor suddenly seemed larger, quieter, and the shadow of danger loomed around every corner. Thomas realized this was just the beginning. The start of a series of events that would turn his life upside down and reveal secrets he never imagined. And as the rain continued to fall, Emily clutched Thomas's hand, determined to protect him at all costs. She didn't yet know how far this danger would take them, but one thing was certain, they would have to face the shadow together. The night had given way to a gray morning, and New York City was waking up to a mixture of fog and metallic noise. Emily stood by Thomas's office window, her eyes still dark with fatigue, but shining with fierce energy. She was only 9 years old, but her life experiences had made her incredibly mature. Orphaned for several years, she had learned to survive alone on the streets. Every day was a struggle, finding food, avoiding danger, and keeping her spirit intact despite the cruelty of the world around her. Yet, despite her poverty, she retained a rare kindness. Her small hands had saved more than one abandoned creature, and her heart was loyal to those who inspired her trust. Emily clearly remembered the first time she'd met Thomas Walker. She'd seen him one sunny morning in the park, where she'd been trying to steal some breadcrumbs. Unlike other passers-by, Thomas hadn't chased her away or scolded her. He'd looked at her, gently questioned her, and discreetly slipped an apple into her hands. From that day on, she'd called him Uncle, an affectionate nickname that symbolized both protection and admiration. But that morning, Emily knew the danger was real. Someone wanted to harm Thomas, and she had witnessed the threat before he realized it. She had heard whispers in the shadows, seen suspicious figures near her usual pastry shop, and felt an unease that no adult seemed to notice. Yet, despite her fear, Emily hadn't hesitated. She'd run through the rain, through alley after alley, to warn Thomas in time. And now, in the manor's study, she stood ready, watching every move. Her instincts told her that the plot wouldn't stop at the cake. Thomas, aware of the little girl's courage, approached her and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Emily," he said softly, "you did a very brave thing. You saved me." Emily looked down, embarrassed by the attention. I didn't mean for anything to happen." Thomas smiled slightly. "I know. And that's why I trust you. But we're going to have to be careful. There's someone who really wants to hurt me." Emily nodded, her small body quivering with determination. "I'll help you, Uncle. I won't let them hurt you, or Lily." At that moment, a sharp noise echoed through the hall of the manor. Emily jumped, and Thomas felt his heart race. The shadow of danger was already approaching, closer than they had imagined. Detective John Harrison re-entered the room, his face grave. "We found something," he said. "The cake was just a warning. The real plan is still underway." Emily felt a chill run down her spine, but she straightened, ready to face what was coming. The little beggar from the streets of New York, who had known hunger, fear, and loneliness, now understood that her life and uncle's were about to be intertwined in a struggle greater than anything she had imagined. And as the town awoke to the morning mist, Emily swore to herself that she would protect Thomas and Lily, no matter what. For the first time, she wasn't alone in the storm, and together, they would face the shadow that hung over their lives. The rain had stopped, leaving behind glistening streets and a sky heavy with gray clouds. Thomas Walker stood in his study, his hands clasped behind his back, scanning the city below. Emily sat on the windowsill, her eyes still alert, watching every movement outside. John Harrison, the private investigator, had just finished examining the cake. He had taken samples for analysis in his laboratory, using his extensive knowledge of chemistry and forensics. Thomas, John said, placing a thick file on the desk, the cake comes from a very special bakery. Luxurious, yet understated. It looks like it was chosen on purpose to send a message, not to be purchased casually. Thomas frowned. A fancy pastry shop? Here in New York? That's strange. Who would want to harm me enough to poison me through a pastry shop? Emily interjected, her voice shaky but firm. I saw her, a woman. She was wearing a black coat and red gloves. She was talking to someone before she left. I think she was looking at me. John nodded. Very well. We have a visual lead, but it'll take more. He pulled out a notebook and began making a list of suspects. Thomas, there's someone who's never forgiven you for your professional separation. Victoria Caldwell. She's known for being calculating, ambitious, and she'll stop at nothing. Thomas tensed. The name echoed in his memory like a silent alarm. Victoria Caldwell had been his partner on several major real estate projects. Their collaboration had ended a few years ago, not without tension. Thomas knew she harbored deep resentment. She would have the means and the motive, Thomas murmured. But I can't believe she would go that far. Never underestimate resentment, John replied. And besides, Emily identified a single, elegant woman, that matches Victoria. Thomas took a deep breath. He realized he had to act quickly. Every second counted. He decided to visit the bakery the next day, ostensibly to buy a cake for Lily, but really to gather clues. Emily, her heart pounding, leaned toward him. I want to come with you. I could help him, and protect you. Thomas looked at her for a moment, then nodded. Very well. But we have to be careful. No one must know we're investigating. The rest of the day passed in a mixture of preparation and tension. Thomas contacted trusted allies, secured the house, and considered every detail of the plan. Emily, despite her small stature, displayed unwavering determination. She knew the city like the back of her hand and could notice details invisible to adults. As night fell, Thomas took one last look at the city through the large windows of his office. The shadow of danger still loomed, but for the first time, he felt a glimmer of hope. With Emily by his side, and John to guide him, he could begin to unravel the mystery behind the poisoned cake. But he also knew that every step brought them closer to the truth, and to those who would do anything to stop them. The next morning, New York City awoke to a heavy, threatening sky. Thomas Walker and Emily quietly left the mansion to go to the bakery, each alert, each aware that danger could arise at any moment. The streets, still glistening from yesterday's rain, seemed more hostile than usual. Emily walked beside Thomas, her small eyes scanning every face, every suspicious movement. She had developed an instinct only street children could possess, spotting a threat before it struck. They had barely entered the neighborhood when something caught Thomas's attention. An elegant but strange figure, dressed in a black coat, stood in the shadow of a closed shop, watching their movements. Thomas felt his heart sink. The danger wasn't just a rumor, it was there, palpable. Emily, stay close to me, he whispered, his voice low but firm. The pastry shop, once luxurious and renowned, seemed sinister this time. The gleaming windows reflected their image like a distorted mirror, and every sound, the jingle of a bell or the rustle of a bag, seemed to amplify their tension. As they approached the counter, a strange smell rose from the display case, a faint but suffocating scent, almost imperceptible. Emily frowned, a bad feeling passing through her. At that precise moment, a clumsy delivery man dropped a box at the entrance. The noise sounded like thunder, and the shadowy figure quickly backed away, disappearing into a nearby alley. Thomas felt a surge of anger and fear. Someone was following them. Someone knew they were investigating. Inside, the pastry chef, a middle-aged man with a pleasant but tired face, greeted them. He seemed shocked to see them. I don't know how this cake was delivered," he stammered. "We simply prepared the order." Thomas noted the man's nervousness. He wondered if the pastry chef was complicit or simply a pawn in a larger plan. John, who had quietly joined them, examined the area carefully. "Someone used this pastry as a cover," he murmured. "And I bet the pastry chef didn't know." As they stepped outside, Emily felt that presence behind them again. A black car with tinted windows was following close behind. The tires squealed slightly as it made a sharp turn to outrun them. Thomas felt the adrenaline rush through him. They were no longer on a routine investigation, they were being hunted. Back at the manor, Thomas locked all the doors and windows. He turned to Emily, his face drawn but determined. "You're right," he said. "It wasn't just a warning. It was a test. And they know we're investigating now." Emily nodded. "We have to be ready. They're coming back, and they're not going to hold back." The rain started up again, hammering against the windows of the manor as if to heighten the tension. Thomas and Emily, united by this imminent danger, understood that every second counted. The plot was only just beginning, and the shadow hanging over them stretched, invisible but deadly, ready to strike at the least expected moment. That day, Thomas realized that caution alone would not be enough. He had to act, anticipate, and above all protect those who mattered most, his daughter Lily and little Emily, who had become much more than a simple protégée. She had become his ally, and perhaps his only chance of surviving this dangerous game. Thomas's manor was steeped in a heavy, silent atmosphere. The rain pounding on the windows created an almost hypnotic rhythm, but inside, the tension was palpable. Thomas and Emily awaited the results of John Harrison's tests with a mixture of impatience and fear. John finally entered the office, a thick file in his hands and a grave look in his eyes. "Thomas, what we discovered is beyond anything I imagined," he said, sitting down. "The cake wasn't just poisoned, it contained an extremely rare and sophisticated substance capable of causing temporary paralysis, followed by serious cardiac effects if the dose was sufficient." Emily took a step back, her face pale. Was that meant to kill you?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Thomas felt his heart clench. "Yes, and someone planned this with precision." He took a deep breath, trying to channel his anger and fear into determination. "John, we need to find out who orchestrated this. And we need to act fast." The detective opened the file, revealing photos, notes, and witness statements. "We have a solid lead, Victoria Caldwell. Her finances, her movements, and some witnesses match. She had one motive, to regain control of part of your real estate empire and eliminate anyone who stood in her way." Thomas straightened, his face hardened with worry and anger. Victoria Caldwell, he should have expected her to come to this. She had always been calculating, ambitious, and cruel, but he had never imagined she would use poison to get her way. "But that's not all," John continued. "We discovered a coded message in the cake delivery receipt. It mentions a meeting planned for tomorrow evening, at a discreet location. Victoria could be meeting an accomplice there or coordinating an attack." Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. "So, they'll come back." Thomas placed a protective hand on her shoulder. "Yes, Emily. And this time, we'll be ready." He stood and stared out the window, observing the city, which seemed oblivious to the impending storm. His mind raced, how to protect his daughter Lily, keep Emily safe, and foil Victoria's plan. Every move had to be calculated, every ally evaluated. That night, Thomas organized a stakeout around the manor and tightened security, while Emily prepared her little tricks, knowing the city better than anyone. John, meanwhile, contacted his informants to gather information on Victoria and her accomplices. As the city lights came on in the night, an idea formed in Thomas's mind: they would reverse Victoria's plan. If they could anticipate her movements, gather the evidence, and catch her in the act, they could put an end to this plot once and for all. Emily, despite her fear, felt ready. She had lived on the streets, faced hunger, loneliness, and violence. But what awaited her now was different. It wasn't just her survival, but that of those she loved. And for the first time, she wasn't alone. The secret of the cake had been revealed, but the battle was only just beginning. Night had fallen on New York, and the city seemed held in an eerie silence, interrupted only by the distant drone of cars and the wind blowing through the alleys. Thomas Walker, Emily, and John Harrison moved cautiously through the dark streets, their senses on high alert. The plan was simple, but risky. They had to intercept Victoria Caldwell before she carried out her attack. The bakery was just the beginning, and John had identified a discreet warehouse in Brooklyn as a likely meeting place with his accomplices. Emily, despite her young age, led the group. Her eyes scanned every face, every shadowy corner, detecting suspicious silhouettes with surprising acuity. "Uncle, over there," she whispered, pointing at a black van that seemed to be following them from a distance. Thomas felt his heart race. "We have to lose them," he murmured. John nodded and ordered them to take narrow alleys, shortcuts that only those who knew the city well could take. Emily, smiling determinedly, led the way. But they had barely rounded a bend when the van appeared in front of them, blocking them. Two masked men got out, clearly ready for a fight. Thomas instinctively stepped in front of Emily. "Back up," he shouted. Emily, true to her courage, grabbed a small vial of powder John had given her earlier to distract or blind the attackers. With a quick movement, she tossed it under the van. Dense smoke rose, blurring the men's vision. Taking advantage of this moment, Thomas and John pushed Emily toward a side passage and sprinted at full speed. They finally emerged into a narrow alley, panting, their hearts pounding. "It was too close," Thomas said, catching his breath. "They know we're investigating." Emily, though young, displayed impressive courage. "We must go deeper, and find Victoria before she strikes again," she said with surprising maturity. John nodded. "Exactly. Time is against us. Every minute counts. Victoria is intelligent and calculating. She won't do anything without planning every detail." They headed toward the warehouse, staying in the shadows, using side streets and quiet passageways. Every corner, every reflection in a window could hide an enemy. The tension was so great that they could hear their own breathing, and the slightest noise could betray them. Arriving near the warehouse, they watched from a distance. Several figures were moving inside, and Victoria Caldwell stood in the center, talking with her accomplices. Thomas felt a mixture of fear and determination wash over him. This was their chance, their only opportunity to foil the plot before it was too late. Emily squeezed Thomas's hand, knowing this moment would determine their survival. "We're going to stop them, Uncle," she said firmly. Thomas nodded. "Yes, together." As night fell upon them, the trio realized that the race against death had begun. The shadow hovering over them was no longer just a warning, it was now tangible, ready to strike. But they were determined, ready to face the danger and reveal the truth, whatever the cost. The Brooklyn warehouse was plunged into semi-darkness, lit only by a few hanging lamps and the glow of flickering fluorescent lights. Thomas, Emily, and John watched from a hiding place, their eyes fixed on the figures inside. Every gesture, every word could reveal a crucial lead. "Look at this," John murmured, pointing to a makeshift surveillance board and maps pinned to the wall. "Victoria doesn't do anything haphazardly. She has a network. Accomplices, informants, and even contacts in certain companies who could make our job more difficult." Emily shuddered, but her gaze remained determined. "So, it's not just a cake, it's a whole plan." Thomas nodded, his mind racing. "Right. And if we want to survive, and protect Lily, we need to understand this network." They spent the next few hours observing. Victoria Caldwell was methodical, every move calculated. She didn't speak much, but her gestures betrayed total authority. Her accomplices seemed nervous, each playing their part but depending on her to coordinate their actions. "We need concrete evidence," Thomas said. "Not just observations. If we're going to stop her, we need to be sure of everything." John nodded. "There's a computer there, probably for communication with his outside accomplices. If we can access it, we'll have a digital trail of his entire network." Emily, though small, showed surprising boldness. "I can go through the back door. No one will notice me." Thomas looked at her with a mixture of concern and pride. "Very well, but be careful. John, you cover her, and I'll stand by." The plan was put into action. Emily slipped silently inside through the back door, weaving behind crates and pallets. Her fingers trembled slightly when she found the computer, but her concentration overcame her fear. She began photographing the files and noting the names and contacts that appeared on the screen. Outside, Thomas and John watched every move, ready to intervene. Suddenly, a door creaked from inside, startling Emily. One of Victoria's accomplices was approaching. Without losing her composure, Emily slipped behind a pile of boxes, holding her breath. The woman passed by, oblivious to the girl's presence. A few minutes later, Emily emerged with the crucial information. "I have everything," she whispered, her eyes shining with pride. "Names, places, everything." Thomas and John welcomed him, impressed by his courage. "You were incredible," Thomas said, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Thanks to you, we finally know the extent of his network." But John frowned, worried. "The problem is, this network is vast. Victoria isn't limited to this warehouse. She has contacts everywhere. We need to act quickly before she discovers we have evidence." Emily clenched her fists in determination. "We have to stop her. Before she does any more harm." Thomas looked at her and felt immense pride. This street girl, orphaned and vulnerable, had become an indispensable ally. Together, they would confront Victoria Caldwell and thwart a plot far greater than just the poison cake. As the night drew on, the town seemed oblivious to the impending danger. Thomas, Emily, and John knew every minute counted. Victoria's hidden network had just been revealed, and the fight for survival and justice was only just beginning. A few days later, Thomas Walker received an unexpected invitation, a charity gala hosted by Victoria Caldwell herself. The event was supposed to celebrate the success of several local businesses, but Thomas knew it was a perfect cover for his clandestine maneuvers. Emily, sitting next to him in the mansion, frowned. "Do you have to go?" she asked, her voice shaky but determined. Thomas nodded. "Yes. This is our opportunity to confront Victoria directly, and gather the final evidence." John, loyal to their side, added, "We have to be careful. This gala is her comfort zone. She knows everyone, and there will surely be accomplices everywhere." The evening was sumptuous. Chandeliers glittered, waiters glided silently among the elegantly dressed guests, and classical music filled the vast hall. Curious glances turned toward Thomas as he entered with Emily at his side, small but confident, and John, imposing and vigilant. Victoria soon appeared, radiant in an elegant black gown. Her smile was polite, but her eyes betrayed a cold, calculating intelligence. She advanced on Thomas with feline grace. "Thomas Walker, what a surprise to see you here," she said, her voice soft but icy. "And who is this little girl?" Thomas replied calmly, "Emily is coming with me. She's been a great help these past few days." Victoria smiled, but this time there was something dangerous in that smile. "I see," she murmured. "Very well, have fun tonight. But remember, some surprises aren't always pleasant." As they moved into the room, Thomas and John exchanged glances. They knew the decisive moment was approaching. Victoria's accomplices seemed nervous, watching Thomas's every move, but none could predict the intelligence and cunning of the team. Emily, discreet but attentive, spotted a series of documents left on a table near the buffet. Quickly and discreetly, she slipped in, retrieved the files, and returned to Thomas and John. "This is what we were looking for," she whispered. Thomas took the documents and his heart raced. They contained all the evidence of Victoria's manipulations, illegal contacts, and plans. Everything they had suspected was confirmed. But Victoria, sensing suspicious movement, turned. Her icy gaze met Thomas's. "You're playing a dangerous game, Walker," she said as she approached, her voice a mixture of threat and calculated charm. Thomas stood in front of Emily, determined. "Yes, and this game ends tonight." Tensions rose. Every guest seemed oblivious to the silent confrontation unfolding in the center of the room. Minutes ticked by like seconds in an invisible countdown. As she quickly reached for the documents, John intervened with precision, blocking Victoria and creating a protective shield around Thomas and Emily. A direct confrontation was inevitable, but they were ready. Emily, despite her size and age, showed incredible courage. "You can't win," she whispered, her eyes shining with fierce determination. Victoria stepped back slightly, realizing her plans were in jeopardy. For the first time in a long time, she felt fear, the fear of being outsmarted by those she had underestimated. What should have been a simple gala evening turned into a silent battleground. And Thomas, Emily, and John realized that this moment marked the beginning of the end for Victoria Caldwell, if, and only if, they could gather all the evidence and act intelligently and quickly. The tension in Thomas Walker's mansion was palpable. The evidence recovered at the gala finally gave them the upper hand, but Victoria Caldwell wasn't one to give up easily. Thomas, Emily, and John knew the final showdown was approaching. That morning, an anonymous message was slipped under the door of the manor. "You think you've won? The real game begins now." Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. "Uncle, she's not going to give up." Thomas nodded, his features tense. "No, Emily. She's going to try something dangerous. We have to be ready." John checked every exit in the mansion and every surveillance angle. "Victoria knows your habits. She knows where we are, probably even what we're planning." Shortly after, an alert sounded on Thomas's phone, a video call from an unknown number. The screen lit up and Victoria's icy silhouette appeared. "Thomas," she said calmly, but with a hint of threat. "You've played smart so far, but you're still far from victory. If you don't come and meet me, your charges," her voice grew colder, "will pay the price." Emily squeezed Thomas's hand. "We can't give in. Not now." Thomas took a deep breath. "We won't go alone. John, prepare security and surveillance devices. We must turn this trap to our advantage." A few hours later, they arrived at the warehouse Victoria had chosen as their meeting place. Everything was silent and tense, each footstep echoing in the empty room. Emily stood behind Thomas, ready to react to the slightest movement. Suddenly, Victoria appeared, surrounded by her accomplices. Her eyes shone with fierce determination. "Well done, Walker, you were smarter than I thought," she said, a hint of defiance in her voice. Thomas replied calmly, "Victoria, it's over. You're trapped. All your actions have been documented. And your accomplices know we have everything." Victoria gave a cold smile. "Do you think that's enough?" And with a quick gesture, one of her accomplices tried to block their path. John intervened, restraining the accomplices with precision while Emily, agile and quick, secured the digital evidence in her bag. Thomas stood in front of Victoria, looking straight into her eyes. "Victoria, there's no escape," he said firmly. "Surrender." Victoria stepped back, realizing her final plans were compromised. The network she had built, the threat she posed, all was now exposed. She realized her final maneuver had failed, and for the first time, fear was evident in her eyes. Emily smiled slightly, her breath short but her heart filled with pride. "We did it, Uncle," she whispered. Thomas nodded, feeling a huge weight lifted from his shoulders. But he knew this wasn't just a victory over Victoria, it was the protection of Lily, Emily, and everything that mattered to him. As the final confrontation drew to a close, Thomas, Emily, and John realized that justice could prevail, even against those who seemed invincible. The sun was finally rising over New York, bathing the city in a soft, comforting light. Thomas Walker's mansion, which had been the scene of so much tension and danger, once again exuded tranquility. Victoria Caldwell had been arrested, her accomplices neutralized, and all her schemes exposed thanks to the evidence collected by Thomas, John, and especially Emily. The authorities had been impressed by the extent of the network they had uncovered and the accuracy of the information. Thanks to this action, not only was Thomas protected, but several other lives had been saved from potentially dangerous shenanigans. Emily, sitting on the living room sofa, looked at Thomas with shining eyes. "We did it, Uncle, we really did it." Thomas hugged her, a mixture of pride and emotion in his voice. "Yes, Emily. Thanks to you, this is all over. You were braver than anyone." John, sitting nearby, smiled and nodded. "That little girl was a game changer. Without her, we would never have had this evidence. She's exceptional." The little girl blushed slightly, but felt her heart swell with pride. She was no longer just a street orphan, she had become a heroine, recognized and respected for her courage and intelligence. Thomas's daughter, Lily, entered the room, and Emily stood up to greet her. "Are you okay?" she asked. Lily nodded, smiling shyly. "Yes, thank you." Thomas smiled, observing the scene with satisfaction. His family, though unlikely at first, was now united by courage, loyalty, and love. Emily was no longer alone in this world, she had found a family that protected and respected her. The following days were marked by restored tranquility. Victoria Caldwell faced justice, unable to escape the consequences of her actions. Thomas resumed his professional activities, but with a renewed focus on the safety and well-being of those he loved. Emily, meanwhile, continued to learn and grow, now free from the fear that had been her constant companion for so many years. She knew that no matter what obstacles lay ahead, she was never alone again. One evening, sitting together in the living room, Thomas watched Emily and Lily play and laugh. "You see," he said softly, "sometimes the smallest have the greatest courage. And through that courage, we have found peace." Emily looked up at him and smiled. "I will always protect you, Uncle." Thomas placed a hand on her head, moved. "And I will always protect you, Emily. We are family." The town outside the manor continued its life, oblivious to the dramas that had unfolded. But inside this home, a new era was beginning, an era of security, trust, and newfound happiness. And for Emily, Thomas, and Lily, it was the beginning of a future full of hope and promise.